Well, hello there and welcome to another edition of 5 Minute Friday. I'm so glad you clicked on this video. This Sunday at the Beltline Church of Christ, we are going to be diving in to the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And we're doing this as part of our series of lessons looking chronologically at the life of Jesus Christ. Now, these words are considered by some to be the most important words in the entire Bible. But what is so sad to me is that these words seem to be more debated today than they are actually followed. Some of this sermon that we're going to be looking at over the next several weeks are difficult. There's no doubt about that. Some of these words are so difficult that many a preacher has simply left them alone, decided not to preach about them, or glossed over them. And I think if we understand a little bit of history around these words of Jesus, it will help us here. Now, early in the life of Christ and early in the life of the church, leaders thought that the words of Jesus were something that you could and should practice literally. The problem was, as the centuries rolled on, in fact, by the 4th century, when large numbers of people were being baptized into the Catholic Church, Christian leaders began to make a distinction between those who really kept the hard teachings of Jesus, like the Sermon on the Mount, and those who were just simply baptized into the church, who were expected only to follow the basic precepts. And so this hierarchy formed between clergy and laity. Now, the clergy had to do the hard things, but the regular everyday folks, you didn't need to worry about it too much. And I think that problem still rears its head in our lives today. And so over the centuries, the Sermon on the Mount became, to quote Randy Harris, something for extra credit. And eventually, people began to believe that this sermon was just too hard to actually put into practice. Oh yes, Jesus was proclaiming the new ideal of a new kingdom, but his words were not meant to be practiced literally, some believed. In fact, some church leaders, including the famous Martin Luther, have even taught that Jesus intentionally sets a high standard in the Sermon on the Mount, not to get us to try to follow these things, but to illustrate how short we fall and how much we need the grace of God. And while there's no doubt we need the grace of God, I completely disagree with Luther. The point that Jesus is making is not to set some lofty goal that we can never attain, but to get us to follow him in every aspect of our lives. So over the years, there's been a transition with the sermon. It began with, in the early church, we can do this. And then it progressed to, number 2, well, the church leaders can do this, but it's too hard for regular people. Then it became, well, the teachings of Jesus are too hard for anyone to follow, and if we do try to follow them, it's going to lead to nothing but legalism like those Pharisees. 4, the teachings of Jesus are too hard, but they do show us our need for God's grace. Keeping the law is not the point. That's what some people believed. And then I think this is where we've arrived with the sermon today. Yes, these words are difficult. They are too hard. But by God's blessing and grace, we've got to do all that we can to try to keep these in our life. And I want to suggest to you that number 5 that we just talked about is a return to what Jesus and the early church thought. And that's a good thing. We can do this. We can follow the words of Jesus. We can follow the teachings of Jesus. But we certainly need God's empowerment and grace in order to obey what Jesus says in this sermon. This sermon is full of hard teachings. But I believe Jesus wants us to live out these teachings to the best of our ability, even if we have to do it imperfectly. I believe also that by living these teachings, Jesus wants to give us an incredible and abundant life. He even promises that if we practice these commands and we teach others to do so, we will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Not to mention that Jesus in the sermon himself says to put these teachings into practice is wise, and to not do them, well, that's just foolish. So the question for us today is not, can you do these teachings? These teachings are doable. They may not be doable perfectly, but they are doable. So yes, we can expect some failure in our life. And yes, we can expect some resistance from ourselves and from other people as we try to live out these truths from the Sermon on the Mount. But the question is not, can you do them? The question for us is, will you try? Will you try? And I hope that you will. we're going to be diving deep into the Sermon on the Mount over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And so I hope that you'll spend some time in this section of Scripture. Read ahead, come ready to engage the text this Sunday. Whether in person or online, we hope that you'll join us at the Beltline Church of Christ. Thank you for being a part of this 5-Minute Friday, and don't forget to put in a good word for Jesus everywhere you go. God bless you, and have a great week.